Hey guys, YouTuber 100 here. And yeah, it's been about 10 days now since I have made a video. Yeah, I've just been some like stuff going on the last 10 days, and yeah, and it's kind of kept me away from making any videos. But yeah, I am finally here with another video. Yeah, and yeah, and as you can see, if you saw my channel icon on right down there, you can see that, yeah, I did meet Kurt Angle. Yeah, I was talking to you guys about that in my last video. Like at the end of it, I said that I was going to meet Kurt Angle, and yeah, and I did back on like the 11th. So yeah, it was pretty awesome that I really did actually get to meet Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle is only now the second wrestler that I've ever actually met. The first one was Beth Phoenix. I met Beth Phoenix back when I was a senior in high school back in 2012. So yeah, so Kurt Angle is really just the second wrestler I've ever met, and yeah, and it was really awesome to meet him. Yeah. So yeah, it just feels real awesome that I have actually gotten to meet Kurt Angle. Yeah. So yeah, so for any of you that are actually in like Arizona, like there's like a store in town that like is like a wrestling collectible store. I'll have their Facebook page down in the description for all of you that are based in Arizona, mainly like the Phoenix area. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I'll have their Facebook page down in the description, and yeah, and now they actually have a demolition coming in February, which is going to be pretty cool. And yeah, and they've had like some other wrestlers appear there as well. So yeah, so if you're like in Arizona, mainly the Phoenix area, yeah, if you get a chance to come to the store, come check it out, and yeah, and you may get a chance to meet some meet some wrestlers at some point. Yeah. All right, yeah. So anyway, yeah. So for this video, I decided I would do something different than what I have done. Yeah. So yeah, so I have watched like the FanScription videos that Channel Awesome does. Yeah, the channel for like nostalgia critic and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, they do have like a series is on the channel that they call Fanscription. I'm not sure how many of you have actually heard about that, but yeah, they like have done like a series where like they kind of like go over movies and they kind of like rewrite the scripts to kind of like give the movies a different story. Yeah, I'll have like a playlist of all the Fanscription videos that Channel Awesome has done so far in the description if you want to see them. Yeah. Yeah, and I do like what they do. It is like an interesting concept for that series, how they really are taking movies and kind of like just rewriting them to really like pretty much give the film a different story. Yeah, yeah, and I have seen that they have like done some for like some Disney films. I've seen they've done like ones for like a Lion King, Aladdin, Hercules, Frozen, Little Mermaid, and even like the most recent one they've done was Beauty and the Beast. Yeah, so they have done like quite a lot of Disney films in that Fanscription series. Yeah. Yeah, and I like the idea for it, so I figured that I would actually, yeah, like I would give a shot, and I would kind of like just make my own sort of a fanscription, and yeah, so yeah, and what I decided to do is I decided to do one with it being close to Thanksgiving. Yeah, I figured that it would be nice to really like do one for Pocahontas. Yeah, so yeah, so what my fanscription really is what if Kocoum didn't die in Pocahontas? What if Kocoum wasn't killed in Pocahontas? So yeah, so of course, like Pocahontas, like it really has like it has like received kind of like a mixed reaction from people over the last 28 years. Yeah, like some people like it and others don't. I've seen like just very contrasting reviews for the movie, like for the Disney December review that Doug Walker did. He's like said how he's not really big into the movie. I've seen other videos of people saying they're not big into it. Yeah, and others saying that they do like the movie, and I myself do like the movie as well. Like I've already like reviewed Pocahontas, and yeah, and I do like it. Yeah, but yeah, as I've like been thinking about it, watching these channel awesome like fanscription videos, like it's really got me thinking of like what if like a Kocoum wasn't actually killed in Pocahontas? Because yeah, even before I watch these fanscription videos, as I watch Pocahontas and the scene where Kocoum gets killed, it really kind of makes me think if Kocoum wasn't killed, if Thomas didn't actually shoot Kocoum in the movie, like uh could they have actually like gotten Kocoum to calm down and really talk sense into him? And really just how would the film really change if Kocoum wasn't actually killed? So yeah, so I kind of just was watching those fanscription videos, and as I was thinking about it, I really was just thinking of how would the film really be different if Kocoum wasn't actually killed? So yeah, so I really did think about it. I kind of rewatched Pocahontas, and yeah, and I just kind of just as I was watching it, I just really did write my own sort of fanscription story for the film. So yeah, so this is going to be my like personal fanscription for how the film really would be if Kocoum wasn't actually killed in the movie. So yeah, so yeah, yeah. So before I actually start this, I just want to establish that this really is not really to make the movie really closer to the actual Pocahontas tale, because yeah, as I'm sure a lot of you know, Disney's Pocahontas was really a fictionalized story of the actual Pocahontas tale. So yeah, so this really is not to actually make the film closer to how the real story actually did go. Yeah, this really is just how I real I excuse me. This is really just kind of changing things around and just kind of giving the movie sort of a different tone. So yeah, so let me just get started. So yeah, so this is how Pocahontas really would be if Kocoum wasn't actually killed. So yeah, so let's get started. So yeah, so the movie would open up pretty much the same way that the actual movie really does. Basically, the first 10 minutes of the movie would stay the same, with John Smith and the Virginia Company like setting out on the ship to travel to the New World, and yeah, and we would still get the introduction of all those characters with John Smith, Thomas, Ben, Lon, Radcliffe, and all of them. Yeah, so it. So yeah, so that opening would still pretty much remain the same as how it is in the actual film. The only thing that would be different is Thomas would be shown to be more of a timid person than he is in the actual movie, and he would be a bit clumsier. Yeah, and possibly maybe even during that whole storm bit, when Thomas does fall overboard, it mm, it would probably be caused by something that Thomas accidentally did that would cause him to fall overboard. Yeah, so Thomas would just be much clumsier in this version than he was in the actual movie. Yeah, and yeah, and like I said, everything would still pretty much be the same, with John Smith recovering Thomas, and yeah, and the rest of that sequence would still remain the same, and yeah, and we would still get the opening credit sequence with Steady as a Beating Drum and Paladin returning to the village. Yeah, and then yeah, then we would just see Pocahontas' introduction would still stay the same as well, with her introduction and her jumping off the cliff down to Nakoma, and yeah, Pocahontas would still have a Miko and Flit with her and stuff. Yeah, yeah, then yeah, and Paladin still does praise Kocoum for his bravery in the battle with the Massawomacs. Yeah, in this version, Kocoum would be a much more likable person, and he wouldn't be the serious person that Pocahontas called him in the actual movie. While Kocoum is still a very brave warrior, like in this version, he's shown to be he's compassionate, he's friendly, and he cares for many in the tribe. And in this version, Pocahontas and Kocoum are also they are good friends, and Pocahontas actually would have feelings for Kocoum this time around. Yeah, yeah. Then yeah, and then as Pocahontas reunited with her father, they would still have that talk when they reunite, right? And Pocahontas still telling her father about the dream that she's having. Yeah, then yeah, and then Powhatan still does tell Pocahontas that Kocoum wants to marry her. Yeah, and this time around, Pocahontas is actually more willing to marry Kocoum, and she does get along really well with him, and she does agree with her father that Kocoum would be a good husband for her. But Pocahontas still is thinking about her dream, and she's wondering if it still would be the right thing for her. Yeah, yeah. Then after Pocahontas does receive her mother's necklace, and then she does go to visit Grandmother Willow, of course. Yeah. And Pocahontas still would have the Just Around the Riverbend song. Yeah. And then Pocahontas she does makes the visit to Grandmother Willow for advice about marrying Kocoum. And Pocahontas explains to Grandmother Willow that she's not necessarily against the idea, and she is willing to do it with how good Kocoum is to her. She does still talk to Grandmother Willow about her dream and the spinning arrow. And pretty much the rest of that sequence still does stay the same as it does in the actual movie. And then Pocahontas does see the strange clouds. Then upon arrival to the land, Ratcliffe appoints John Smith in charge of making sure that their search for gold doesn't get interrupted by any savages. Yeah, and this time around, before we actually do get anything with Pocahontas actually watching John Smith, we do get some more of each of them with their people. So yeah, so we do get some more stuff them actually being with their people before we actually do get anything with them together at all. Yeah. Yeah, shows how John Smith actually does stick around with his men to help set up Jamestown, and he is exploring the land with Thomas, Ben, and Lon. Yeah. Yep. And then, meanwhile in the village, Paladin announces Pocahontas and Kocoum's engagement to the tribe, and everybody is delighted about the news. But it's shown how Nakoma is feeling very jealous of Pocahontas because, yeah, Nakoma also does have some love for Kocoum, and she was hoping to marry him. But now seeing her best friend Pocahontas now being engaged to the man she loves, it has made her feel really jealous. And as Pocahontas does talk to Nakoma about her engagement to Kocoum, Nakoma does tell Pocahontas that she is very happy for her, but yeah, but in reality, she does feel that Pocahontas has made her feel she's stolen Nakoma's man from her. Yeah, and it shows how things are fine between them at first, but then over time, as Nakoma does see Pocahontas and Kocoum together more and more, it does cause some tension, and it puts a dent in their relationship. And then as Powhatan then does learn of the arrival of the Englishmen to their land, we still do get that scene where like Powhatan is telling the tribe how they need to learn more about the visitors. And he does ask Kikata how he sees them. Kikata still does depict them as dangerous beasts, yeah. But with Kocoum now being more compassionate in this version, rather than actually saying how he will lead the warriors to destroy them. Kocoum does speak up, saying that they are different than any other men that they've ever encountered before, and they could be different. And Kocoum makes the suggestion that they should investigate the Englishmen further rather than just jumping into an attack. Yeah. And Paladin does agree, since they don't know enough about the white men to just jump into a fight with a strange form of man to them. And Paladin then has Kocoum form a group to observe the Englishmen, and he implies, "Let us hope they are no danger to us." And then Pocahontas, overhearing the conversation, then decides to sneak off to observe them herself. And as Pocahontas then arrived at Jamestown, as she's hiding in a nearby bush, she looks around all the camp, and then she's observing the Englishman, and then she eventually does spot John Smith. And yeah, and she is instantly fascinated with him. And as John Smith was continuing to observe the land, Radcliffe does feel that they are safe from the savages, but John Smith tells Radcliffe that they could still be out there. So Radcliffe sends out John Smith to see if he can find where they may be, like in the actual movie. And then as John Smith then ventures out, Pocahontas secretly follows him around. Yeah. And then everything from this point on pretty much does stay the same as it is in the actual movie, all through when Pocahontas and John Smith first meet. So we still do get the Mine, Mine, Mine song from Radcliffe, and then we get the whole stuff with John Smith and Pocahontas first meeting at the waterfall. That sequence does pretty much still stay exactly the same, and Pocahontas and John Smith meeting and they introduce themselves, So from that point, pretty much up to that point, everything does still stay the same as it is in the actual movie. And then as Kocoum and other members of the tribe are observing Jamestown and the Englishmen, they do discover their great number of men. But then as they see them digging for gold, Kocoum starts to think that his a depiction of the Englishmen are correct about them being no threat to their people, and some of the fellow tribe members that are observing them do start to agree with Kocoum as well. But then, having no luck in finding any gold, similar to what does happen in the actual movie, Thomas, Ben, Lon, and several other of the men are expressing their frustrations to Radcliffe about not finding anything. And as Radcliffe just brushes the complaints off, he then notices a member of the tribe looking over a bush, and then Radcliffe alarms the men of an ambush, and then they all arm themselves with guns and start firing. And it does play similarly to how it does in the movie, but then as some of the tribesmen are about to return fire with their arrows, Kocoum, realizing how outnumbered they are, orders a retreat to prevent anybody from actually being killed. Then as they begin to retreat, one of the tribesmen end up being hit by a gunshot from Radcliffe, similar to what happened in the actual movie. But other tribesmen are able to carry him away before anybody can kill him. And then at the village, Powhatan and Kocoum are tending to the injured tribesmen, and Kocoum then just feels ashamed that he was wrong about the Englishman, and he feels responsible for the tribesmen getting shot. And then he assures Powhatan, "I will do whatever I must to destroy these white demons, great Powhatan." And Paladin, realizing that they can't fight the enemy alone, like in the movie, he tells Kocoum to send messengers to every village to summon help to fight, and tells the tribe to stay away from the dangerous white men. But then Kocoum then notices that Pocahontas isn't there, and knowing the adventurous person Pocahontas is, and concerned for her safety with the white men on their land, as Kocoum sends out the messengers, he then sets out to find Pocahontas. And then as he starts to look for Pocahontas, Kocoum then gets a song here about Pocahontas' safety and that he'll always protect her. So I guess maybe we can call this song Pocahontas. And it's just Kocoum singing about how he'll protect her and how he'll find her. And then the scene with Pocahontas and John Smith talking to each other about how what like what they do still does stay in, and that scene does stay the same, but the perspective slightly changes. During this scene, it shows Kocoum still searching for Pocahontas, and he eventually comes across Pocahontas' canoe in the water, and then he realizes that Pocahontas is close by, and then he eventually can hear her voice, and then he finds her talking to John Smith. And Kocoum is shocked to see Pocahontas with a white man, and he's immediately ready to jump in and save her. But then Kocoum realizes that John Smith wasn't actually part of that attack, and he starts to wonder if maybe John Smith might be different from the other white men. So Kocoum decides to observe John Smith with Pocahontas to see how he actually treats her. Yeah, and yeah, and as Kocoum is watching from above, like the scene still does like a stay the same. Like we still get all the stuff with John Smith showing Pocahontas a handshake, Pocahontas showing John Smith how they say Wingapo and Ana, and Miko getting the compass, and yeah, and everything that does happen in that scene. Yeah. But yeah, then when it gets to the part where John Smith mentions savages, Kocoum starts to believe that John Smith is a danger like the others. But then, as Pocahontas then sings the Colors of the Wind song, like during that song, Kocoum then realizes John Smith has gotten the message that Pocahontas was telling him, and then Kocoum calms down. But then Kocoum then hears the sounds of the drums from the village, and Pocahontas also hears the drums. And then Pocahontas then does leave, and when Kocoum sees Pocahontas off, he then races back to the village as well. Yeah. And then, as Pocahontas returns to the village, she then runs into her father. Powhatan also noticed that Pocahontas was gone, and he tells Pocahontas that it's not safe for her to go out with the dangers in their land, and tells her that she must stay in the village until it's safe. Pocahontas agrees, and as Kocoum also returns, he doesn't actually tell Powhatan what he saw, thinking that Powhatan would call off their marriage as he would think Kocoum couldn't keep Pocahontas safe. But uh, Powhatan tells Kocoum that he must keep watch over Pocahontas to make sure she's safe from the white men. And meanwhile, in Jamestown, the men notice a change in John Smith's demeanor and how quiet he's been. John Smith hasn't really said much over the last few days. Ratcliffe eventually notices John Smith's gone, and like in the movie, he sends Ben and Lon to find him. Yeah. Yeah. And then then we get the scene with Pocahontas and Nakoma like gathering food for when the warriors arrive. And Nakoma also notices Pocahontas has been very quiet as well. Nakoma begins to feel that maybe she made Pocahontas feel bad about her engagement to Kocoum. Yeah. And then Powhatan then arrives, and while he does allow Pocahontas to gather the food, he reminds her not to go too far. And so concerned for their safety, Powhatan sends Kocoum to protect them. Yeah. And as Powhatan walks off, Nakoma was feeling guilt for making Pocahontas feel bad. She apologizes to Pocahontas, and Pocahontas says that she's fine, but Nakoma can still see that she's bothered by something. And she asks Pocahontas if she wants to talk about it, and then John Smith appears. Yeah. Yeah. Nakoma is in shock, but Pocahontas, like in the movie, she covers Nakoma's mouth and asks her not to say anything as Kocoum is approaching, and Pocahontas then runs off with John Smith just before Kocoum arrives. And when he does, Kocoum asks Nakoma where Pocahontas is, and Nakoma denies seeing her. Yeah, but Kocoum senses Pocahontas is with John Smith again, and as he walks off, he then trails Pocahontas. Yeah. And Kocoum then follows Pocahontas and John Smith over to Grandmother Willow, and he overhears John Smith say that his men are just looking for gold. And when Pocahontas reveals that there is no gold, and John Smith does say how some of his men may leave, Kocoum starts to think perhaps they are misjudging the white men, and they're not actually looking for a fight. But when John Smith mentions that he doesn't have much of a home to go back to, Pocahontas tells him that he could belong there. So yeah, so it does play out like it does in the actual movie once again. When Kocoum then hearing this, he's seeing Pocahontas' connection to John Smith as merely a friendship. And Pocahontas even tells John Smith that she's already marrying someone else. And Kocoum is willing to accept Pocahontas' friendship with John Smith. But yeah, Kocoum realizing that Powhatan won't see it that way, he then rushes back to the village to try to convince Powhatan to call off the fighting. Yeah. Yeah. And then, then the rest of that scene still pretty much does stay the same, with John Smith meeting Grandmother Willow, and then with Ben and Lon arriving on the scene, and Grandmother Willow tripping them and scaring them off. Yeah. Yeah. And then, then as John Smith heads back to the camp, Pocahontas then tells Grandmother Willow how she feels wrong seeing John Smith when she's already promised to Kocoum. Pocahontas isn't sure what to do, but Grandmother Willow reminds Pocahontas about her dream, which makes Pocahontas wonder if the spinning arrow was pointing to either Kocoum or John Smith. Grandmother Willow then just tells Pocahontas she should look inside herself to figure out who she really belongs with. And then, as the warriors then arrive in the village, Pocahontas does return. Yeah, and Nakoma then questions what Pocahontas was doing with one of the white men, but then Pocahontas spots Kocoum with Paladin, and Kocoum has tried to convince Paladin to call off the fighting, but he's been unsuccessful. With Paladin reminding Kocoum of what the white men have already done and tells them they have no choice. Then as Paladin starts to gather with the council, Pocahontas then tries to convince her father that they can deal with the white men another way. And it does still pretty much stay the same as it does in the actual movie with she is trying to tell her father that they should try talking to them, but Paladin tells her they don't want to talk, and then Pocahontas asks her father if one of them did want to talk, would he listen? And Paladin says of course he would, but it's not that simple. Yeah, and then upon John Smith's return to the camp, we still get that scene with him trying to talk to his men in Radcliffe, telling them that trying to convince them not to attack, and he tells them that there's no gold, but Radcliffe still refuses to listen and decides to launch an attack on the tribe tomorrow morning and appoints John Smith to lead the charge. And he also tells John Smith that if he refuses, he'll have him tried for treason and hanged. And then that night, Pocahontas again sneaks off to see John Smith. Nakoma confronts her about it, and Nakoma, now just filled with frustration, then just yells at Pocahontas. She tells Pocahontas first she steals her man, and now she's betraying her people. And Pocahontas, tells Nakoma that she's trying to help her people, and Nakoma tries to warn Pocahontas of the danger she's putting herself in, but Pocahontas assures Nakoma that she knows what she's doing before she runs off. And Nakoma does immediately go to Kocoum and tells him about Pocahontas running off. Kocoum immediately knows what Pocahontas is doing. Despite willing to accept Pocahontas' friendship with John Smith, Kocoum fears her going to see him at night could lead to a trap. So Kocoum again goes after Pocahontas. And John Smith also does sneak out from the camp. And like in the movie, Thomas notices, and Radcliffe sends Thomas to follow him and arms him with a gun, telling him to shoot any Indians he sees. Yeah, and then as Pocahontas and John Smith meet back at Grandmother Willow, the scene still does pretty much stay the same like it does in the actual movie. With them talking about how Pocahontas is trying to convince John Smith to come talk to her father, and and then Grandmother Willow giving them the example of the ripples and everything. And then as John Smith then agrees to go to talk to Paladin, that's when both Thomas and Kocoum arrive on the scene. Then as Pocahontas and John Smith kiss, Thomas is shocked to see it, but Kocoum, watching his promised wife now kiss another man, has now realized that it's more than just the friendship that he thought it was. This then makes Kocoum snap, and he charges at John Smith and attacks him. And Kocoum then pulls out his bone knife in an attempt to kill John Smith. And this sequence still does basically stay the same as well. Huh. And then as Thomas runs in and prepares to shoot Kocoum, as Thomas has his gun aimed at Kocoum ready to fire, Thomas is then too nervous to shoot, thinking he could hit John Smith from having a horrible shot. So Thomas instead flees back to the camp for help. And then eventually Pocahontas is then able to help pull Kocoum off of John Smith and eventually calm him down. Yeah. Then Pocahontas then explains the situation to Kocoum and that she actually does love John Smith. And Kocoum is upset to hear it, but because he cares so much for Pocahontas, he accepts it, wanting her to be happy. And then John Smith then tells Kocoum that he wants to come back to their village and talk to Paladin. Then Kocoum, having heard the situation, he now realizes that he was right about his original judgment of John Smith's men, and that they're just being misguided. So Kocoum then apologizes for trying to kill John Smith and decides to bring him to the village with Pocahontas. And as they arrive at the village, when Paladin sees that Pocahontas and Kocoum have brought John Smith, initially he's outraged that they've brought a white man back into the village. But Kocoum explains to Paladin why they've brought John Smith there, while Pocahontas does remind her father what he said about if one of them wanted to talk. So Paladin, staying true to his word about his daughter, decides to listen to what John Smith has to say. And as John Smith explains the situation to Paladin, he attempts to make peace with him. And then it seems that John Smith is actually getting through to Paladin, but then all of a sudden, gunshots can be heard, and it's revealed to be Thomas, Ben, Lon, and several other of John Smith's men. They've invaded the village to save John Smith, believing he was captured. Yeah, but before they can actually recover John Smith. Then the entire tribe and warriors stand off against them and forcing them to flee. And then, seeing the wreckage around the village, Paladin is furious, believing the whole thing was a setup by John Smith for an attack on the tribe, and orders him to be taken prisoner and executed at sunrise, declaring war with his men. And he also believes Kocoum put the village in this danger by bringing John Smith into the village, and orders Kocoum be taken prisoner for treason and be executed along with John Smith. Pocahontas tries to tell her father that they didn't do anything to endanger the village. Powhatan doesn't listen and berates Pocahontas for disobeying him and tells her they're all in even more danger because of her foolishness before John Smith and Kocoum are taken away. Nakoma sees Pocahontas distraught over this and feels guilty for sending Kocoum after her. She believes Pocahontas about the attack being unplanned and apologizes to her for what she said to her. Yeah. But Pocahontas still feels John Smith and Kocoum will die because of her. Knowing Pocahontas loves John Smith, like in the movie, she takes her to see him as he awaits his execution. And yeah, and that whole sequence still pretty much does stay the same as well. And at the same time, Nakoma also goes to see Kocoum as he awaits execution. Nakoma feels awful and apologizes to Kocoum for getting him in this situation. Kocoum tells her it's not her fault. What she did shows how much she cares about Pocahontas, just like he does. Kocoum says he's just happy it's him dying instead of Pocahontas. Yeah. And during both of these encounters, this is also when we have that song "If I Never Knew You" that was used in the 10th anniversary DVD release for the movie. So yeah, so I'm sure like if you any of you have actually had like that version of the DVD, then you do probably know this song. Yeah. For those of you that don't know this song, I'll have like this song posted in the description if you haven't heard it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the song is sung by all four characters, really just alternating between both interactions. Yeah, and then as Pocahontas and Nakoma then leave, it shows how both John Smith and Kocoum sing their last solos as they're looking to the sky, and it also shows how Pocahontas and Nakoma singing their last solos while in the canoe. And as Pocahontas looks in the water, she sees her and John Smith together, and Nakoma also sees her with Kocoum. Yeah. And then, as Thomas, Ben, Lon, and the other men arrive back at the camp, they explain to the others of John Smith's capture and the location of the village. Radcliffe, overhearing this, is actually happy to hear John Smith has been captured by the savages, but wanting to look heroic and still after the gold, Radcliffe orders a charge to rescue John Smith, but he's actually just really wanting to do the job of killing John Smith himself and fight the savages at sunrise. Yeah, and this is where we get the savages sequence with both sides preparing for battle, with both John Smith and Kocoum looking on for the tribe's preparation. Yeah. Yeah. And then it shows both Pocahontas and Nakoma with Grandmother Willow. Pocahontas is like still tells Grandmother Willow how John Smith and Kocoum will be killed at sunrise, and Grandmother Willow tells them how they have to stop their people from killing them, but Nakoma asks how they can stop all their people by themselves. Grandmother Willow reminds Pocahontas of her dream, but Pocahontas still feels lost on what path she's followed. Yeah. And as they're both just sitting there feeling helpless, it's still like this the rest of the scene still just play out as it does in the movie, where Miko gives Pocahontas the compass, and then as Pocahontas and Nakoma watch the arrow spin, Grandmother Willow tells Pocahontas that this is the arrow from her dream. And with both of them in love, Pocahontas then realizes how the spinning arrow wasn't only pointing her to John Smith, but it's also leading Nakoma down the path to Kocoum. Then, as the sun rises, Grandmother Willow still tells both of them that it's not too late, and they must work together and let the spirits of the earth guide them down their paths. And as the arrow stops pointing, as the arrow stops spinning, as it points forward, Pocahontas and Nakoma then are shown to have determined looks on their faces as Grandmother Willow tells them to follow their paths. Yeah. And then as both sides head for battle, it shows how John Smith and Kocoum are being dragged by the tribe for their executions. And then as the second Savages segment plays, it shows Pocahontas and Nakoma racing to save John Smith and Kocoum. And then as both John Smith and Kocoum are prepared for execution on the cliff, they're placed right next to each other. And just as Paladin is about to deliver a fatal blow, Pocahontas and Nakoma then swoop in and shield John Smith and Kocoum. And this scene pretty much does stay the same too, just with the lines that Pocahontas uses in this moment, alternating between her and Nakoma. And as they both confess their love for Kocoum and John Smith, both sides are shocked to hear of Pocahontas' love for John Smith. And the scene still does play out how it does in the movie. And then Pocahontas and Nakoma get through to Paladin. Then he does give that speech about everyone having anger in their hearts, while Pocahontas and Nakoma have courage and understanding. And he acknowledges that nobody has actually been killed, so therefore, if there's to be any killing, it won't start with him. And then both John Smith and Kocoum are released. And as the four of them embrace with both sides looking on, Radcliffe, still wanting to kill John Smith himself, orders his men to open fire, but they refuse, and Thomas tells Radcliffe that John Smith's been let go, but Radcliffe tells the men that he still committed treason, so therefore he should be executed. But nobody obeys Radcliffe's orders, realizing his deceit. So then Radcliffe then takes a gun to shoot John Smith himself. But rather than just standing around like they did in the actual movie, the men and then are actually trying to stop Radcliffe from firing. And then John Smith then notices Radcliffe's intent to shoot him. So then John Smith then shields Pocahontas, Nakoma, and Kocoum from the gun. And just as Radcliffe is able to fire, Paladin then jumps in front to save John Smith, and the shot ends up hitting Paladin. Then Paladin then collapses to the ground, with Pocahontas immediately rushing to her father's side. Yeah. And seeing what Radcliffe has done, the men then all restrain him as Thomas takes the gun, and then he does still tell them to bound Radcliffe in chains. And then it just shows Pocahontas, John Smith, Nakoma, and Kocoum all seen beside the injured Paladin. And it shows how Paladin's still alive, but he's badly hurt. And as this time around, Paladin is a nurse back to health. Both Kikata is uncertain about the wound, and he doesn't know how they can fully heal it. Then John Smith says how he should take Paladin back to England where he can be fully treated for it. So then Paladin agrees to go, and then Pocahontas decides to go with him. So then, as John Smith and his men then take Paladin to the ship, it does still show Radcliffe bounded and loaded onto the ship to face punishment for his crimes. And as Paladin is about to be loaded on board, he says someone needs to take care of the tribe while he's gone, and he says he knows who's worthy of serving as chief. And then it then shows Kocoum then appearing, wearing Paladin's headdress and holding his stick. And Paladin says Kocoum has shown good judgment. He knew we had misjudged John Smith and his men, and he was always willing to protect my daughter. His bravery and dedication shows he will make a fine chief. And the tribe all cheers with Kocoum being appointed the chief. But Paladin also says how Kocoum has had a change in marriage choice. It then shows it then shows Nakoma then walking up beside Kocoum. Kocoum says he's now found someone who truly does love him. And Paladin also tells the tribe, my daughter has also had a change in marriage choice. She's chosen her own path that's right for her. And it then shows Pocahontas and John Smith together, with everybody cheering and applauding. And Paladin then ends by saying, I shall return when healed. And then Pocahontas then runs up to Kocoum and hugs him, saying, thank you for always willing to protect me. And John Smith then also walks up to Kocoum to thank him and shakes his hand. And Kocoum then tells John Smith he's always welcome among their people. And then Pocahontas, John Smith, and Paladin are then rowed to the ship, with Kocoum and everyone else looking on. Then, as the ship then sets off, it then shows Kocoum running to the top of the cliff that Pocahontas is standing atop in the movie, watching the ship depart. And as the ship is departing, Pocahontas, John Smith, and Paladin see Kocoum watching, and they wave a nod to him, and then Kocoum waves back. And then the camera then just zooms out with Kocoum looking on with the ship in the distance as the movie ends. And there we have it. That is my fanscription for Pocahontas. Yeah, I really did think about this, and I really did think that it did seem fitting to really have Kocoum be made the chief as Powhatan goes to England. And something also I've also kind of thought of is, does Powhatan actually make it? Yeah, because it was always a thought of how John Smith was presumed to have died in the voyage back to England. So it was kind of interesting to really keep this kind of open to really debate whether Powhatan actually does make it or not, and whether Kocoum actually did remain the chief after this. So that was kind of an interesting thing to really think about also, and I kind of left this out in the open to really let people really decide for themselves. So you guys can really make your own judgment on whether or not Powhatan actually does make it or not. Yeah. And yeah, so I hope that this really was a really nice story to really give Pocahontas. I really don't know if the movie would have actually gotten a better reaction if this is what they actually did do with it. Because one of the complaints that the actual movie has gotten, how it was a pretty predictable for a lot of people. And for this version, my version, I don't know if this really it does come across as not as predictable. No. But it really did kind of feel nice to really go and kind of make this story for it. So what did you guys think of my fanscription for Pocahontas? Did you guys actually like my story for this? And I know that I really did leave quite a bit of scenes in that are in the actual movie. I just felt that these scenes really could stay the same for the story that this my version of the film has. So I hope that you guys really did my fanscription for Pocahontas. Yeah, this does really give Kocoum more of a role in the movie, and it really does really make him I think a more interesting character. So I hope that you guys really did my fanscription for the movie. All right, so so that is my fanscription for Pocahontas. I hope you guys liked it. And so I don't know, so maybe a channel awesome will actually see this video, and who knows, maybe this could give them inspiration to really make their own fanscription for Pocahontas. Who knows? yeah but so that is my fanscription for Pocahontas. So I hope you guys did enjoy this video. And of course, with Thanksgiving coming just in a few days, probably in the next couple of days, I will make a Thanksgiving related review like I've done the last few years. I'll probably make another Thanksgiving review sometime in the next few days. And of course, also with Survivor Series being this Saturday, sometime this week I'll also make a retro Survivor Series review. So stay tuned for those videos coming up sometime this week. All right. But I hope you guys did enjoy my fanscription for Pocahontas. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.